about to begin.
I am honored to welcome President and Mrs. Bush and our other distinguished guests here with us this morning to the special ceremony for the awarding of an honorary degree. Would you all please remain standing for the invocation which will be offered by Reverend Joseph C. Williamson, Dean of the Chapel.
Let us pray. O God, our help in ages past, we gather in this august room suffused with so much history that we can scarcely take it in. Here we are reminded of the history of this nation, conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all humanity is created equal. And here we are also reminded of the history of this university, transmuted from Log College to the College of New Jersey, to Princeton University, an institution choosing to claim itself as flourishing only under God's numinous and sovereign will. But you, O God, are also the source which sustains our hope for years to come. We know that our ages past are not enough. Our past cannot contain us. Our past pushes us into our future beyond inequity, beyond despair. It opens up for us horizons of new possibilities of liberty and justice for all people. Thus we are now assembled here, conscious that we stand in the living present, shaped by past and future, invigorated by our history and our hope. We are assembled here to observe an ancient rite of this university. We engage in that rite both with due solemnity and with a twinkle in our eye. Let us be mindful, O Spirit of the living God, that all ceremonies which honor and express your purpose for our lives move us from ritual to reality, from symbol to substance, from private privilege to public service. Let this day call forth the best from all who share its festive spirit. Amen.
Please be seated. I would now like to call upon James A. Henderson, class of '56, Chair of the Executive Committee of the Board of Trustees, to offer greetings on behalf of the Board.
President and Mrs. Bush, Governor and Mrs. Florio, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to offer greetings today on behalf of the Board of Trustees. This is the 17th occasion in which Princeton has conferred an honorary degree upon the President of the United States, but one of the very few in this historic room. This is really a very appropriate setting. It was in this room that the Congress of a young nation met in the summer of 1783. It was here in this room that Congress officially expressed its thanks to George Washington for his exceptional leadership in the American Revolution. And that visit to Princeton is commemorated in this portrait to my right here by Charles Willson Peale, painted in life with Nassau Hall in the background. It was here that the Congress received news of the definitive peace treaty with Great Britain, and that it first received a minister from the Netherlands accredited to the United States. Among the portraits in this room are those of two Princetonians who preceded George Bush to the presidency. James Madison, class of 1771, who stayed as Princeton's first graduate student, was one of 9 Princetonians to attend the Constitutional Convention in 1787, the largest delegation from any college, and who later became the first president of the Princeton Alumni Association. And of course, Woodrow Wilson, class of 1879, who served as faculty member, president of the university, governor of New Jersey before his election to the White House, and who coined the term Princeton in the nation's service. So as we look around us, we realize we're indeed in distinguished company, and I thank each of you for being with us on this historic occasion.
Thank you, Jim. I would now like to call upon the trustee who serves as University Orator, Edmund H. Carpenter II, class of 43, to read the honorary degree citation. I would also like to call upon President Bush to come forward for the conferring of the degree.
Smooth-fielding son of our older sister to the north, he was raised in the finest tradition of public service. Apprenticed in a series of distinguished posts, from Capitol Hill to Beijing to the shores of Manhattan's East River, he has ascended to a pinnacle of national and international leadership at a time of sweeping change and complex challenge. Resolute yet compassionate, consultative yet decisive, his commitment to enduring values and his search for a new global vision have earned the support of this nation and the respect of others. We salute him for a lifetime spent in the nation's service and proudly add him as a member of the extended Princeton family. President Shapiro, I present for the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Auctoritate mihi ac curatoribus universitatis Princetoniensis commissa te et gradum doctoris in legibus honoris causa admittum. Congratulations, Mark. Honor to you. Honor to the university and honor for me to be here.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you all very much. This is indeed for me an honor. In the last time, save one, that I was on this campus, I was not treated quite so hospitably. It was out at the baseball diamond, I think, in 1948, crowded along the first base line. It was very hostile, the way it worked in Princeton. Were a bunch of hyperventilating, celebrating alumni. And I remember standing there at first base, and a gigantic tiger, I think his name was Neil Zundell, came to the plate. He lofted an easy fly toward Yale's first baseman, me. And as I reached for the ball, the guy just sheer bowled me over to the cheers of the Princeton alumni. I was hurt. My pride was hurt. But P.S., Yale won the ball game. So how lovely today it is, though. And I view this degree as a very high honor from an institution for which I have unlimited respect. It is a great privilege for Barbara and me to be up with you today. I hear the rites of spring over my shoulder out there, but it wouldn't be normal in my job if we didn't hear those rites chanting out there. But I hope I bring peace and tranquility to your campus because you bring great joy to our heart, my formerly fibrillating heart. Thank you very much.
I know it may be somewhat unnerving for such a loyal son of Yale to wear so much orange and black, but we are delighted and it's honored to welcome you to an extended Princeton family. We hope that you will wear these new colors of orange and black proudly, even if not in New Haven. Now I would like to ask you all to stand, and the benediction will be pronounced by Reverend William C. Gibson, Assistant Dean of the Chapel. Following the benediction, please remain standing at your places until the procession has departed.
May God, the beneficent God, most merciful, the God of justice, bless this occasion for its power to inspire the nation to support the educational aspirations of all its citizens, guiding us to mine the depths of all our resources to lift those at the bottom through the great equalizer of educational opportunity, that the prestige and the power of education not be reserved for the privileged and few only, but for the many, to the glory of God and a noble nation. And now may the God of amazing grace and awesome glory grant unto us the will and the wisdom and the courage as we leave this place. Amen.
C-TEC Cable Systems presents live coverage of President George Bush at Princeton University.
Welcome. Welcome. We are live on the Princeton University campus to dedicate the new Social Sciences Complex and to hear a major policy address given by President George Bush. I'm Nick Morgan, Director of Development Communications, and so far the rain has held off.
I'm Andrea Deal, Assistant to the President for Special Projects, the President of Princeton, that is. We're here in the newly named Scudder Plaza, and we're next to the Fountain of Freedom, which has been temporarily stilled for the occasion so that we can hear a little bit better. There are other temporary measures that have been taken today. There is a platform that has been built over the parts of the fountain to accommodate the press. The White House press corps is here on force, and other media are also in attendance. And there is a platform directly behind us from which the president will speak. Now, we also have a third platform that was built for the occasion, and that is where the Princeton University Orchestra is now performing from. The brass and percussion sections of that orchestra are performing, and they've been going since about 9 a.m. this morning, alternating with the Katzenjammers, which is a student a cappella group, a coeducational group, and they have been entertaining the crowds since about 9. The crowd started forming at around 8 o'clock this morning. Everybody had to get their tickets and go through metal detectors, and then they were ushered to their seats. Shortly, they and you will hear a series of speeches, starting out with one by James Henderson, who will welcome us. Mr. Henderson is the chair of the executive committee of the Board of Trustees of Princeton University.
That makes him very important, doesn't it?
Yes, he is the top trustee, you could say. Now, he will introduce the Reverend Joseph Williamson, the Dean of the Chapel. After the Dean's invocation, Governor Florio will rise to welcome President Bush to New Jersey, and at that point, Harold Shapiro, who is the president of Princeton University, will give some remarks, and then he will introduce President Bush. President Bush is expected to make a major policy address today. After he is done, in about 20 minutes' time, we're expecting him to speak for 20 minutes, the Reverend Sue Ann Steffi Morrow, who is the Associate Dean of the Chapel here, will give the benediction, at which point the band, the orchestra, will strike up a tune to usher all the crowds from the plaza.
Earlier today in Nassau Hall, President Bush received an Honorary Doctor of Laws degree from President Shapiro. Nassau Hall, just across Washington Road, in the heart of the campus, is Princeton's first building, and it housed the Continental Congress during the Revolutionary War, thus making Princeton the nation's capital very briefly at that time. You'll shortly have a chance to hear the citation that President Shapiro read, because he'll read it again for his speech this morning. Almost half of the presidents of the United States have received honorary degrees from Princeton. President Bush is, in fact, the 17th. Some of the others include Thomas Jefferson, alumnus James Madison, James Monroe, Abraham Lincoln, alumnus Woodrow Wilson, and more recently, Dwight Eisenhower.
Actually, Nick, most of the honorary degrees are presented at graduation time. In fact, there's only one honorary degree that has been given to anyone in a time other than at commencement, and that was to President Johnson in 1966. Lyndon Baines Johnson was here 25 years ago, almost to the day, to dedicate that building, Robertson Hall.
It was May 11th, in fact.
May 11th, yes, and that Robertson Hall houses the Woodrow Wilson School for Public and International Affairs. When President Johnson came, it was too close after the Kennedy assassination for a lot of people's comfort, and so his visit was not even announced to the public at all until 6 a.m. the day of his arrival. And yet there were still 3,000 people out in the plaza listening to his address. One other little factoid from that time period, President Johnson was scheduled originally to dedicate the building in October, but that had to be postponed when he went in for emergency surgery, that wonderful gallbladder operation that we all remember so fondly.
Produced the famous scar for
yes, and the famous photograph.
The map of Vietnam, yes.
That's right. At this very moment, the President and Mrs. Bush are scheduled to be in the buildings behind us. The President Bush's motorcade has left Nassau Hall. It has gone down Nassau Street and down Washington Street and turned on Prospect, and the whole entourage got out of the cars at that point and entered into Fisher and Bendheim halls, where they are now touring and taking photographs. And if all is going according to schedule, President and Mrs. Bush are at this very moment greeting local dignitaries and the principal donors.
I bet you can guess the names of the principal donors from the buildings we're dedicating today. As the program that the people here in the plaza have says, today we're dedicating Bendheim Hall, named in honor of donor Robert Bendheim, class of '37, and a longtime benefactor of the university. Fisher Hall is named for Doris and Don Fisher and their 3 sons, all of whom are Princeton graduates. Robert, class of 1976, William, class of '79, and John, class of 1983. Then we move to Jacoby Library in the curved front of Fisher Hall, named for Robert Jacoby, class of '51. Finally, Scudder Plaza, which is the area around us here, is named in honor of Edward Scudder, class of 1903, by his 2 sons, Edward and Richard Scudder, both of the class of '35. Edward Scudder was a student of Woodrow Wilson's, and they remained close friends throughout their lives. Incidentally, the Scudders are a family steeped in Princeton history. One of their ancestors, Nathaniel Scudder, was the class of 1751 and died during the Revolutionary War.
Well, in just a few minutes, President Bush and the other guests will come out and stand on this platform behind us. For those of you who just tuned in, let me run down the program again. It will begin with James Henderson, the chair of the Executive Committee of the Board of Trustees of Princeton University, welcoming the crowd. And he will introduce the Reverend Joseph Williamson, the Dean of the Chapel here at Princeton, who will give the invocation. At that point, Governor Florio will take the stage and welcome the Bushes to New Jersey. And then Harold Shapiro, the president of Princeton, will come on and give a few remarks and introduce George Bush. After President Bush's speech, and he is expected to give a major policy address today, the Reverend Sue Ann Steffi Morrow will she is the Associate Dean of the Chapel, and she will give the benediction.
This setting is particularly appropriate for the President's speech. The building behind us and behind the stage is Corwin Hall. It was named for Edwin S. Corwin, who was President Wilson's successor as Professor of Jurisprudence and the first chairman of the Department of Politics. Of course, the Woodrow Wilson School is named for Princeton's 13th president and the nation's 28th.
And who is that, Nick?
That's a trick question, right? Woodrow Wilson. If you look carefully above the door behind the presidential stage, you can see an inscription carved in stone, a one familiar to most Americans since it's on all of our money. E pluribus unum, out of many, one.
And speaking of many, we have many people in the plaza here today. There are about 750 invited guests, including current and former trustees, alumni, donors to the university. There are certain invited administrators, faculty, and staff. And the New Jersey congressional delegation is here somewhere, local political figures and community leaders. And there are also in the audience are the contractors, some of the contractors and the designers who built and worked on this space. Selected graduate and undergraduate students are here too. And then there was a lottery held to distribute the remaining tickets. There are about 325 tickets that did not go to the VIP people. So from this lottery, tickets were distributed to 200 undergraduates and to 50 graduate students and 75 staff people. A lot of lucky people in the audience.
That's right,
today.
some lucky lottery winners. Well, Princeton is a small school. Many people think it's much larger, in fact, than it is. People often guess that there are 10,000 students or 15,000 students. In fact, there are only 4,500 undergraduates, 1,500 graduate students, and about 1,000 faculty. Although we are a relatively small school, we are the largest employer in Mercer County.
Okay. Should we talk a little bit about the honorary degree that was given this morning to President Bush? We've got a long history of honorary degrees.
We do, that's right, Andrea. We have awarded something like 2,100 honorary degrees over the last 250 years of Princeton's existence. And the methods and criteria have changed over the years, but there is one rule which has been strictly enforced since 1895, and that is that you have to be present to get a degree. The first award ever made was in 1748, shortly after the university opened, and it was given to Jonathan Belcher, who was governor of New Jersey at the time. The trustees were so enthusiastic about the help that Jonathan Belcher had given the university in getting started and getting its charter approved that they tried to name the university after him. Fortunately, wiser heads prevailed, and we don't now have to sing songs in honor of Belcher U.
And we're all grateful for that.
The first woman honored was Willa Cather in 1931. The first black was Ralph Bunch in 1951, and all told, about a quarter of the awards have been given to a Princeton alumni. So I guess it helps to have gone to the school to get an honorary degree. A number of presidents have been awarded the honorary degrees, and President Lincoln was one. He was not able to attend. He was conducting a civil war at the time. He did, however, write a letter, and I'll read you a bit from that letter now. "I am most grateful," Lincoln said, "if my labors have seemed to conduce to the preservation of those institutions under which alone we can expect good government, and in its train sound learning and the progress of the liberal arts. I am, sir, very truly your obedient servant, Abraham Lincoln. A number of other presidents received awards, and a number of foreign dignitaries as well. Princeton has only rescinded or taken back one degree, and that was an award given to Count Johann Heinrich von Bernstorff in 1913, the German ambassador to the U.S. A few years later, when World War I began, the trustees saw fit to rescind the degree and remove Bernstorff's name from the university rolls.
Good thing.
A number of other foreign dignitaries have been given the awards. The West German Chancellor, 3 Canadian Prime Ministers, the UN Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld in 1956, and 2 that the viewers might be most interested in, Bob Dylan in 1970, a little closer to home, a U.S. citizen, in fact, and Ted Geisel, Dr. Seuss, in 1985.
Dr. Seuss. Well, we thought that maybe you'd be interested in what a normal day for the president looks like, and I don't know that this is a normal day, but it probably is for him. It's not for us, I'll tell you that much. The schedule of the president was given to us, and for today, May 10th, 1991, it is very detailed. There are wonderful things on it, like what the men and women who accompany the president should wear.
Are we properly dressed here?
I think we are. We're fine. And what the weather will be. Partly cloudy in the low 60s.
Well, they got that right.
Well, I guess they did, although it does seem to be clearing up a little bit. I hope the rest of the schedule is as accurate. It goes at 8:30 this morning. President Bush and Mrs. Bush boarded Marine One, the helicopter from the White House lawn, zipped over to Dulles Airport, where they got on Air Force One, and they flew up to McGuire Air Force Base, which, of course, recently has been in the news quite a bit with the Gulf War. At the Air Force Base, they switched back to the helicopters, and apparently there were 4 helicopters which circled the area here and landed in Palmer Stadium this morning.
So we have 8 helicopters so far just to get the president?
No, 4.
Oh, 4.
4 helicopters to get the president here. And it took 15 minutes from McGuire Air Force Base to Princeton. And then they got in their motorcade, zipped up to Nassau Hall, got the honorary degree. And the motorcade is 12 cars and 7 minivans, from what I can read on this schedule.
That should be enough.
Including limousines for the President and Mrs. Bush and for Governor and Mrs. Florio. So according to this schedule, we are now currently in the buildings and taking a staff photograph. And this sounds like ruffles and flourishes, though, doesn't it? If it is, then hails to the chief will follow, and the president will come out of the building.
Hail to the chief is the appropriate signal, I think.
That is
I
the
haven't heard
appropriate
that yet.
signal.
So.
Not yet. So we'll just assume that we'll just keep going.
Right.
The whole process is reversed on the way home. They get back into the helicopter, they go to McGuire Air Force Base, and then they go back from there to Dulles. Mrs. Bush goes on her own separate way, and the president goes down by helicopter to Camp David. When he gets to Camp David, he has nothing else scheduled, so I guess his leisure time is a little less scheduled than his official time. I sure hope so, for his sake.
That's right. He needs some rest.
Yes.
Andrea, since I spent some years as a speechwriter for a governor, I learned something about the process involved in creating a presidential speech, such as the one we're going to hear today. It begins really about 6 months beforehand as people try to get their particular events on the president's schedule. So if you're interested in getting your daughter's birthday party or your son's bar mitzvah onto the presidential schedule, you need to contact the White House about a half a year in advance.
I'll remember that.
Good. Then nothing is done for about 5 months. And it's not until about 1 month beforehand that the White House really begins to pay serious attention to the event itself. The first step is to determine whether or not it's to be a major speech. You have 2 kinds of speeches, the major ones and then what the speechwriters finally call rose garden rubbish, or no-brainers. They're largely ceremonial occasions, speeches that don't require much presidential involvement.
Please take your seats.
It appears that the president is about to come out of the buildings right now, and we are looking forward to this ceremony, as is everyone here in the audience. When you hear "Hail to the Chief," that means that the chief is about to show up. So we turn now to the doors and the platform behind us.
The crowd is hushed. We think something must be about to happen. Although, since we're looking the other way, we don't really know. But
Now,
I see Jim Henderson on the stage.
and Governor Florio is
And
there,
Governor
too.
Florio is
Mrs.
there.
Florio.
The president hasn't arrived yet. The Secret Service are very much in evidence.
And as are the press, of course. And we expect very shortly, hail to the chief, which is the signal that President Bush will be arriving at the platform.
I think it's time to stand.
I think it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Mrs. Bush, accompanied by Dr. and Mrs. Shapiro.
Please be seated. My name is Jim Henderson of the class of 1956. I chair the Executive Committee of the Board of Trustees. On behalf of the board, I want to welcome you to this dedication ceremony for Princeton's new and renovated facilities for the social sciences, and specifically for Bentheim Hall, Fisher Hall, Jacoby Library, and Scudder Plaza. I especially want to welcome President and Mrs. Bush and Governor and Mrs. Florio and thank them for distinguishing this occasion with their presence. I would now like to call upon the Reverend Joseph C. Williamson, Dean of the Chapel, for the invocation.
Let us stand. O sovereign God of all nations, O sovereign God of all peoples, we are gathered in this place to celebrate the dedication of this Center for Teaching and Learning with special attention to the concerns of public interest and international affairs. It is surely a propitious time for an occasion such as this. The complexities, the hostilities, the tragedies of the world in which we live demand the best of all our human energies. The mission of this university requires us to address the problems and to seek solutions to these dilemmas. And the prophetic vision of our religious traditions challenges us to a spirit of compassion for all peoples, to nurture and sustain the interconnected web of every living being, to learn collaboration as well as competition in the personal and social dimensions of human existence. We are acutely conscious, God of justice, God of peace, that this day is situated in the aftermath of military conflict. We cannot gloss the human tragedy of that war. We cannot ignore the suffering which still continues in its wake. Help us to remember, now and always, that all human life is sacred, that reverence for life is the highest expression of human character and the finest demonstration of true courage. On this occasion, we honor in particular those benefactors whose generosity and whose vision for learning has made these extraordinary facilities possible. Let these places be characterized by integrity of study and research. Let them be safe for dissent and for consent. Let there be a willingness to attend to the voices of the powerless as well as to the decisions of the powerful. May we acknowledge that neither Princeton University nor the United States of America fulfills its highest purpose by being an enclave of privilege in a world of desperate human need. Let us not forget that those to whom much is given, of them much shall be required. This is our vocation and our charge. Amen.
Please be seated. Princeton's charter, first issued in 1746, provides for two trustees who serve by virtue of office: the president of the university and the governor of the state of New Jersey. We're very pleased that Governor Jim Florio is with us this morning, and I would now like to call upon him for his words of welcome.
Mr. Bush, President of the United States, President Bush, Mrs. Bush, on behalf of the people of the Garden State, we welcome you on this very important occasion. We're extremely glad to have you here to come visit with us, and even in the short period of time that you'll be here, we hope that you will make some new friends and will take home some lasting memories. We are very pleased, President Bush, to see that you're feeling better. I was asked by some of our New Jersey farmers to mention to you that perhaps the whole incident wouldn't have occurred if you had eaten your broccoli. We are particularly pleased to have this chance to thank you, Mr. President, for the job well done in the Persian Gulf. We in New Jersey placed many of our young men and women in your care, and we're grateful for the leadership that's kept them safe. And finally, Mr. President, as we welcome you here to Princeton University, I want to commend you for this important step in self-improvement. Because any time a Yale graduate is willing to admit that he needs a Princeton degree, that says a lot about his desire for learning. And what we hope that you learn here today, Mr. President, is that New Jersey is proud to have you and Mrs. Bush here with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Florio. It seems fitting that this ceremony should take place at a time when Princeton's president is a professor with faculty appointments in two of the departments that constitute this social sciences complex: economics and the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. I would like to call upon the 18th president of Princeton, Harold T. Shapiro, graduate school class of 1964, for his remarks.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Governor Florio. I would like to add my own welcome to this dedication ceremony for these critical new components of Princeton's social science and public policy complex. In some respects, this is a ceremony that can trace its antecedents back to the earliest days of what was then the College of New Jersey. From the beginning, this was an institution that expected its graduates to pursue the social science and public policy as students, practitioners, and leaders, and from the very beginning they did just that. To cite just one example, at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, There were more alumni of Princeton than of any other college, 9 delegates representing 6 different states, including James Madison, who later became our country's 4th president. This is also an institution that has long recognized the importance of interaction and cross-fertilization for the study of public policy. 60 years ago, this recognition led to the creation of the Woodrow Wilson School, and 40 years ago, it led to the establishment of the Center for International Studies. But it was the extraordinary gift 30 years ago from Marie and Charles Robertson, class of 26, that truly allowed Princeton to transform a dream into a reality. That gift endowed the Woodrow Wilson School and permitted the construction of Robertson Hall, which gave tangible expression to a concept of interdisciplinary study and a commitment to quality, whose culmination we celebrate today in the wonderfully intricate web of buildings and spaces that we are here to dedicate. These are spaces in which students and faculty will seek insight and understanding in the worlds of politics and economics, in the relationships amongst peoples and nations, and in development and implications of public policy. They are spaces of infinite variety, some designed for reflection, some designed for debate, some filled with light, such as Jacoby Library, which reaches out from the curved window of Fisher Hall in direction of the Office of Population Research, and some underground in the passageways that serve in some sense as a metaphor for our efforts to forge connections amongst the disciplines that border this plaza. There are many people who made this day possible. Some are presidents. It was President Eisenhower who suggested to the Robertsons that if they wished to make a difference in the world, they use their resources to establish a center for excellence where public policy and international affairs could be studied and taught. Charles and Marie's son Bill, their daughters Anne and Kate, and their spouses are here today to share in this enhanced manifestation of President Eisenhower's advice. 5 years after the Robertsons made their gift, an audience much like today's gathered at this site as another president, Lyndon Johnson, dedicated the building now known as Robertson Hall. The Princeton president who spoke on that occasion was Bob Goheen, and he is with us today as we complete this complex that he first shaped by moving Corwin Hall from its original site across the plaza to this location directly behind us. Also with us today is my immediate predecessor, Bill Bowen, who played a central role in developing each of the spaces we dedicate today, as did his provost, Neil Rudenstein, now also a university president, as a result of his recent appointment at Harvard. I would like to ask President Bowen and Goheen to stand and be recognized. Also deserving of recognition today are the donors without whose faith and generosity none of this would be possible. Bentheim Hall, immediately behind us, houses the Woodrow Wilson School Center of International Studies. It is named for its principal donor, Robert A. Bentheim, an economics major in the class of 1937, a member of the International Studies Center Advisory Council, and a longtime benefactor of Princeton, whose previous gifts have supported the Bentheim Room in the Mudd Manuscript Library and the Lewis Thomas Laboratory for Molecular Biology. In addition to providing faculty offices and conference and meeting rooms, Bentheim Hall provides space for visiting scholars from around the world. Fisher Hall, which has its entrance facing Prospect Avenue, is now home to the Department of Economics. It is a wonderful convergence of parental and alumni support. Fisher Hall is a gift of Doris and Donald Fisher, honorary members of the class of 1976, and their 3 alumni sons, Robert J. Fisher, the class of 76, William S. Fisher, the class of 79, and John J. Fisher, class of 83. Doris and Don Fisher are former co-chairs of the Princeton Parents Fund, were the first chairs of Princeton Associates, and have been generous supporters of the Art Museum, where Doris Fisher serves in the Advisory Council. As I mentioned earlier, the beautiful curved front of Fisher Hall contains the Economics Department's Jacoby Library, named for its donor, Robert E. Jacoby of the class of 51, another undergraduate economics major and a member of the Economics Department Advisory Council, whose remarkable business career in advertising has taken him all over the world. This beautiful outdoor plaza that physically unites this complex, at least above the ground, has been refurbished and named Scudder Plaza in recognition of a gift from Edward W. Scudder, Jr., class of 35, and Richard S. Scudder, class of 35, both of them economics majors at Princeton, in honor of their father, Edward W. Scudder, of the class of 1903, a student and close friend of Woodrow Wilson's. As your program indicates, there are also other spaces within these new facilities that recognize very significant gifts, including a suite of rooms in Fisher Hall, designated the Merrill Lynch Center for International Finance, in recognition of the gift of the Merrill Lynch Company Foundation, and the John Eddie Klein Seminar Room in Bentheim Hall, which recognizes the gift of Mr. and Mrs. John Klein, class of 67, and the Bunge Corporation. We thank all of those who have made these gifts and supported the construction and renovation of this complex, and all who support the work that will take place within it. I also want to take a moment to recognize the extraordinary achievement, yet again, of Robert Venturi, the class of 47, of the Philadelphia firm Venturi, Scott Brown & Associates, the architect for the spaces being dedicated. As many of you will know, Bob Venturi recently won the most prestigious international prize for architectural achievement, the 1991 Pritzker Architectural Prize, honoring a career that has been distinguished for doing precisely what he has done here, overcoming the challenge of sites surrounded by buildings of disparate character in ways that are aesthetically striking, as well as responsive to the needs of those who will use the spaces he designs. And now, it is my honor to introduce yet another economics major, in this case, Phi Beta Kappa, who has developed a subsequent specialty in public and international affairs. This particular undergraduate earned his degree not at Princeton, but at Yale in 1948. I mention the year so that those whose ties to Princeton go back that far can recall the huge gridiron upset in his senior year as the Tigers shut out the Eli's 17-0. Just a few hundred yards from the site to win the Big Three title that year. Yale's basketball team also came to Princeton that winter to lose in a squeaker only at the final buzzer. Unfortunately, however, Princeton's streak was broken in the spring as the Bulldogs recorded a 7-5 win in baseball in a game just down the street that I am sure at least one first baseman and Yale captain will remember well. It is fitting in this setting that we dedicate these spaces to evoke Woodrow Wilson's words at Princeton's sesquicentennial in 1896. And it is fitting that we apply those words in introducing our honored guest. And those words are, of course, in the nation's service. It perfectly describes the life of George Bush. From his days as a Navy pilot in World War II, to his service as Congressman from Texas, as a U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, as Chief of the U.S. Liaison Office in the People's Republic of China, as relationships were being restored following the Cultural Revolution, as Vice President for 8 years, and now as President of the United States, he has devoted himself, in partnership with his wife Barbara, to the service of this nation. Earlier this morning, we welcomed George Bush into the ranks of Princetonians by presenting him with an honorary degree. I would like at this time to read from the citation. I'll quote, "Smooth fielding son of our older sister to the north, he was raised in the finest tradition of public service. Apprenticed in a series of distinguished posts from Capitol Hill to Beijing to the shores of Manhattan's East River, he has ascended to a pinnacle of national and international leadership at a time of sweeping change and complex challenges. Resolute yet compassionate, consultative yet decisive, his commitment to enduring values and his search for a new global vision have earned the support of this nation and the respect of others. We salute him for a lifetime spent in the nation's service and proudly add him as a member of the extended Princeton family." End of quote from the citation. Finally, a personal word. I have had the great honor to serve the President as a member of his Councils of Advisors for Science and Technology. This has given me an opportunity to observe the depth of understanding, courage, and commitment that he brings to the nation's highest office. It is a personal honor and great pleasure to present the President of the United States, George Bush.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Please be seated. It's a great pleasure to be here. President Shapiro, your words were so kind that my heart almost went back into fibrillation. I salute you, sir, and I thank you for the honor bestowed on me. To Governor Florio and to the members of the United States Congress that are here today, to Mrs. Shapiro and the boards of trustees, and Chairman Henderson, Dean Williamson, Associate Dean Morrow, and I'd also like to salute Princeton's former presidents, Goheen and Bowen, and I'm delighted to help dedicate this impressive complex. Though I must say that I'm glad that this is May and not the first snowfall. I don't think Barbara would let me take place in your special brand of Olympics. Seriously, I'm honored to receive an honorary degree from Princeton. Imagine a son of Yale getting a Princeton degree. Son of Yale. You can snicker, but you ought to hear what they call me in Washington. Governor Florio's comments brought back JFK's words when he said how lucky I was to have a Princeton degree, and I agree with him. You remember what JFK said, and I'll paraphrase it. I have the best of all worlds, a Princeton degree and a Yale education. I knew that would not thrill the band, but you did a great job on Hail to the Chief. Thank you. Well, Princeton is a great place. You know, Washington said no college has turned out better scholars or more estimable characters. And that includes, of course, our last two secretaries of state. Both have been outstanding public servants. Both love this university. But only one has a tattoo to prove it. I'll always remember the time that I saw the globe inside the Woodrow Wilson School lobby. Anywhere you touch it, you set off vibrations across the rest of its surface. I can't think of a more appropriate symbol for this nation's role in the world. When we act, we do set off tremors across the globe, and Princeton is blessed with real expertise in the study of the presidency. And I salute Professor Fred Greenstein, and it is with some temerity, therefore, that I give this talk that will touch on the presidency. I'd like to talk today about an American achievement that has inspired men and women worldwide, most recently in Eastern Europe. And I'm speaking of our Constitution. In the interest of brevity, I will focus on the roles of the two branches of government in which I have had the honor to serve, the legislative, Congress, and the executive departments. Consider the president's role. Thomas Jefferson once noted that a president commands a view of the whole ground, while Congress necessarily adopts the views of its constituents. The president and vice president are the only officials elected to serve the entire nation. It is the president who is responsible for guiding and directing the nation's foreign policy. The executive branch alone may conduct international negotiations, appoint ambassadors, and conduct foreign policy. Our founders noted the necessity of performing this duty with secrecy and dispatch when necessary. And the president also serves as commander-in-chief of our armed forces, as it was my role to do in the Persian Gulf. This does not mean that the executive may conduct foreign policy in a vacuum. I have a great respect for Congress, and I prefer to work cooperatively with it wherever possible. And though I felt, after studying the question, that I had the inherent power to commit our forces to battle after the UN resolutions, I solicited congressional support before committing our forces to the Gulf War. And so while a president bears special foreign policy obligations, those obligations do not imply any liberty to keep Congress unnecessarily in the dark. The president's view of the whole ground includes a second responsibility: shaping the nation's domestic agenda. Presidents do this by submitting annual budgets to Congress, along with a comprehensive legislative program. We've had our share of legislative successes. They include a budget agreement that reduces our borrowing requirements by nearly $500 billion over the next 5 years, a Clean Air Act that invokes the power of the marketplace to help America breathe cleaner air, an Americans with Disabilities Act, landmark civil rights legislation that enhances the dignity of those with disabilities, a child care bill that puts more power and choice in the hands of parents when it comes to the care of their own children. But presidents may encourage change through means other than legislation. Our Points of Light campaign encourages the traditional American virtue of private service. Our America 2000 education strategy, which has been well received across the land, involves dramatic reforms that don't make dramatic new claims on taxpayers' earnings. It draws on people's common frustration with an educational system that simply must do better. It encourages people to use their common sense and good old American ingenuity in creating better, revolutionary new schools. It won't help build a new office building in Washington, but it may well inspire people to build a better future for themselves and their children, school by school, community by community. Elsewhere, we've proposed turning programs back to states and localities, and this enables people to craft the most appropriate solution for the problems that they confront in this diverse land of ours. The point is simple. You don't always need to propose a new program to pursue a national goal. Often, a president can lead by encouraging the values of service by helping foster a national spirit of commitment and responsibility. For too long, pundits and special interests have equated vision with bureaucracy. I hope one of the hallmarks of our administration will be its ability to encourage not just good government, but also a good society, one that draws upon and encourages the best instincts and ambitions and values of the American people. The common thread of commitment, individual commitment, runs through all successful efforts to solve our most intractable problems. The individual who cares, who is determined to change things for the better, can make a difference. And all of us Americans ought to dedicate ourselves to making a difference. While a president must take on today's problems and tomorrow's challenges, he also has an obligation to preserve, protect, and defend a 200-year-old system of constitutional government. The most common challenge to presidential powers comes from a predictable source, represented here by several able members of the United States Congress. And although our founders never envisioned a Congress that would churn out hundreds of thousands of pages worth of reports and hearings and documents and laws every year, they did understand that legislators would try to accumulate power. James Madison, your son, Princeton's son, warned that the legislative department is everywhere extending the sphere of its activity and drawing all power into its impetuous vortex. That was Mr. Madison speaking, not President Bush speaking. Sometimes this sort of competition falls entirely within the bounds of the Constitution. But consider the unnecessary requests and requirements that can waste the time and energy of the executive. 30 years ago, we devoted nearly 9.5% of our gross national product to defense expenditures. And today, defense spending accounts for only 5.3% of our GNP. But congressional oversight has grown exponentially. 107 committees and subcommittees, 107 oversee defense programs and spending. For fiscal year 1989, the Pentagon devoted 500 man-years and over $50 million just to write reports responding to congressional queries on such items as plans for manning tugboats and accounting for the number of bands. Defense staff has to respond yearly to more than 750,000 congressional staff inquiries. Other executive agencies exhaust their time and energy, often giving identical testimony to a whole battery of subcommittees and committees. Oversight, when properly exercised, helps keep the executive accountable. But when it proliferates wildly, it can confuse the public and make it more difficult for Congress and the President to do their jobs properly. The chief executive also preserves, protects, and defends the Constitution through the use of the veto power. 6 times in my presidency, I have vetoed bills that would have weakened presidential powers. In one case, for instance, Congress wanted to make a president disclose a wide variety of sensitive diplomatic contacts and discussions, as well as private discussions with the executive branch, and would have threatened to impose criminal sanctions on a wide range of normal diplomatic activities. I noted in my veto message that the result would be a dangerous timidity and disarray in the conduct of U.S. foreign policy. Such a result is wholly contrary to the allocation of powers under the Constitution. Elsewhere, Congress has also taken aggressive action against specific presidential powers, including the power to appoint or remove employees who serve at the President's pleasure. It sometimes tries to micromanage the executive branch, by writing too specific directions for carrying out a particular law. And when this happens, the President has a constitutional obligation to protect his office and to veto the legislation. In addition, on many occasions during my presidency, I've stated that statutory provisions that violate the Constitution have no binding legal force. But there's another often overlooked side of the veto power. Often vetoes encourage the legislature to reconsider its actions. When I vetoed a minimum wage bill, and it wasn't an easy thing to do, I sought to persuade Congress that a slightly lower rate would best serve the public interest. And in time, Congress agreed. And when Congress bundles up a series of unrelated measures and calls it a single bill, it frustrates the President's constitutional role in resisting the influence of special interests. It is often impractical to veto a tremendous bill, a major bill, especially an appropriations bill, because of unrelated riders that would never stand a chance on their own. Bills of this sort can pose as much of a threat to Congress as to the President, and it has become an annual sport for reporters to pull peculiarities out of the vast spending bills, such as a federal grant to study cow belches or a Lawrence Welk museum, and ask Congress to defend them. Quite often, because of the added riders and the complexity of the whole bill, members don't even know what they voted for. They're so complex. Things are added in the dark of the night. And I have sought and will continue to seek a line item veto to prevent such embarrassments and protect the American people from injudicious appropriations. Right now, Right now, 43 governors have such a power. It works. The president ought to have that power too. Some believe that I already have that power under the Constitution. In closing, let me try to summarize my view of the presidency. Presidents define themselves through their exercise of presidential power. They must use their special authority to serve the whole nation in matters of foreign and domestic policy. They must set a tone for governance, at once leading the people, yet following their desires. They must preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, and they must encourage deliberative behavior on the part of Congress. But the real power of the presidency lies in a president's ability to frame, through action, through example, through encouragement, what we as a nation must do, what is required of communities and institutions, large and small, in schools and factories and the hundreds of daily acts of individuals. The great joy and challenge of the office I occupy, and believe me, I am honored every single day I walk into that Oval Office by the privilege of being president. The great joy is that the president serves not just as a unitary executive, but hopefully as a unifying executive. As president, I feel honor-bound to strengthen the marvelous system of government bequeathed to us so that we may remain the freest, the most decent, the most prosperous, caring nation in the history of the world. Thank you, and may God bless each and any one of you, and thank you for the honor you bestowed on me.
On behalf of the trustees of the university, I want to thank you again, Mr. President, for participating in this ceremony and for your thoughtful remarks and insights on the challenges of the presidency today. And we appreciate the leadership you are bringing to this nation. I also want to thank Mrs. Bush, seated here on the platform with Mrs. Shapiro, for being with us this morning. And finally, I want to thank all of you who have borne witness to this dedication for your presence on this historic occasion. I now would like to call upon the Reverend Sue Ann Steffi Morrow, Associate Dean of the Chapel, for the benediction. At the conclusion of the benediction, please remain in your places until the presidential party has departed, after which time the buildings will be open for those who are interested.
And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. Bless you in your work and in your endeavors, in your accomplishments and through your failures. The Lord's face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Grace you with a sense of humor and of goodness, a sense of belonging and common purpose. The Lord's countenance be lifted up upon you, giving you peace, a peace that pushes the bounds of your compassion, a peace that embraces those who are different, a peace that shelters and nourishes all of God's children. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Amen.
Again, I want to thank President and Mrs. Bush for being with us this morning and ask you to join with me in wishing them a very fond farewell.
Thank you all.
Welcome back. We're live again. We've just heard the President Bush give a speech about the role of the presidency and the relating congressional role in government. The President began by quoting Jefferson to the effect that while Congress has a narrow field, the President must take in the whole ground. He defined the presidential and congressional roles, and he claimed some credit for some of the things that have been done so far in his administration, including progress on the budget, the Clean Air Act, the Disabilities Act, and a new strategy for education. He said, "We don't need a new program to promote a new goal," arguing that it was better to inspire the private sector to work on its own and the people to work on their own rather than to start another bureaucracy. He said he wanted to encourage, and it was the President's job to encourage a good society. He asked us to dedicate ourselves to make a difference. The President talked about bureaucracy in Congress and complained of, for example, the 750,000 congressional inquiries that the White House faces each year, or the 107 oversight committees. And he talked about veto power, his way of controlling that congressional excess. He says he's used it 6 times to keep presidential power intact, and other times for vetoing particular problems in bundled bills that include endless riders and odd appropriations.
Well, the President spoke for about 20 minutes here today. Earlier today, he was in Nassau Hall receiving an honorary degree, and we now have a tape of that we can show you what happened inside of Nassau Hall.
It's right here. It's fine.
Smooth-fielding son of our older sister to the north, he was raised in the finest tradition of public service. Apprenticed in a series of distinguished posts, from Capitol Hill to Beijing to the shores of Manhattan's East River, he has ascended to a pinnacle of national and international leadership at a time of sweeping change and complex challenge. Resolute yet compassionate, consultative yet decisive, his commitment to enduring values and his search for a new global vision have earned the support of this nation and the respect of others. We salute him for a lifetime spent in the nation's service and proudly add him as a member of the extended Princeton family. President Shapiro, I present for the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Auctoritate mihi, ac curatoribus universitatis Princetoniensis commissa, te et gradum doctoris in legibus, honoris causa admitto. Congratulations, Mark. Honor to the university and honor for you to be
We are back live on the air. President Bush has just spoken here, and we are about to speak to Congressman Zimmer, who is with us, who is one of the members of the body about which President Bush was complaining. And he is with us now. Congressman.
Welcome, Congressman Zimmer.
Pleasure to be here.
And can you give us your reaction to the speech you just heard? The President spent a fair amount of time complaining about the Congress that you're a part of.
That's right. If there were a headline to the news article about it, it would probably be President to Congress, get off my back. I think that's perfectly normal. It's the way the Founding Fathers wanted it. They wanted the two branches of government to be struggling and contending against each other. And in many of the cases that the President cited, I think the Congress has gone too far in trying to micromanage the affairs of government. In other cases, I might disagree with him and feel that it's important that we pull our end of the constitutional powers as he's pulling on his end. And as James Madison, who graduated this institution, pointed out, that kind of working of power against power not only preserves our liberty, but also gives us the best government.
I see. And so you think some sort of balance, perhaps, between the two roles would be the appropriate thing.
And when each side is complaining that the other is too powerful, maybe you've got that balance.
So those 750,000 congressional inquiries that the president... That's too many, I see.
Look, I wouldn't defend all the nonsense that Congress gets into. And although we have made inquiries on our own that I think are legitimate, and the president would agree are legitimate, we had constituents in Operation Desert Storm that families wanted to know about. They didn't know where they were stationed, whether they were injured, where they were going. In some cases, military secrecy was appropriately invoked, but in other cases, it was just sheer bureaucracy that kept the families from getting the necessary information. That is the job of a congressman, and sometimes the job of a congressman means that the executive branch people get gray hair. It's
what about
not the most efficient system, but I think it's the best yet devised.
What about the line item veto? He asked again for that. He's asked for that many times. How do you feel about that?
I'm very strongly in favor of the line item veto. I was a state legislator here in New Jersey for 9 years where our governors have the line item veto. It works well. It saved our state taxpayers millions upon billions of dollars, and it could do much more for the federal taxpayers. I was a little disappointed that the president, when he gave a glancing reference to those who say that he already has the power to veto certain aspects of legislation, I was hoping he would choose this event to say that not only does he have the power to exercise a line item veto under the Constitution as it's presently drafted, but he intended to exercise it and to bring a court test of that power. It would be, I believe that, as he said, the Founding Fathers never intended that we'd have these enormous omnibus appropriations bills where the president couldn't veto them without shutting down the whole government. What we've got to do, I believe, is to have, I'd like to see a constitutional amendment at the federal level, the same as we have in New Jersey, that limits legislation on one subject at a time. Then the president could veto it one at a time. And if Congress insists on lumping together thousands and thousands of provisions in one bill, I think the president ought to say these are the equivalent of 1,000 bills and veto the parts that are no good.
The president took some credit for making progress on the budget. How do you think the record stands there?
Well, I voted against the president's budget a few weeks ago in Congress. I voted against the Democrats' alternative budget as well. They both proposed a $290 billion deficit, and that's just too much. I think that budget compromise of last fall was nothing to be proud of because it merely perpetuates deficits of hundreds of billions of dollars as far as the eye can see.
Congressman Zimmer, thank you very much.
Thank you. We have behind us, I believe, the mayors of Princeton Township and Borough, and we'll try to talk to them. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
And
we have the mayors here now. If they'll step forward.
as you know, Princeton is divided into Princeton Borough and Princeton Township, and here we have the mayor of Princeton.
I'm Marvin Reed, the mayor of Princeton Borough, and with me was Dick Woodbridge, the mayor of Princeton Township.
So we've got both these two confusing districts here today. I've never been able to figure out which is which.
Well, we've got the mayor
where
of
are we now?
Mayor of Princeton. You're in the borough.
I'm in the borough now. Good. All right.
But if you try to leave the borough, you'll pass through the township.
Oh,
you can't get out of the borough without going through the township.
So it's like a donut in the hole.
The donut in the hole, right. So but we were very happy to welcome the president today. We had a chance to meet with him briefly before the session, and he looked amazingly in good health and seemed to be up for the occasion.
Yeah, I think we're all concerned about his health. He did look well.
No, I wouldn't be concerned about it after today.
I think perhaps he was the healthiest looking person in the room. I don't think there's anything to be concerned about. I had a very nice short chat with him, both Marvin and I, and a photo opportunity, and then came out here.
Did you speak about anything in specific with the president, or just pleasantries?
Well, we greeted him on behalf of the town, and he said that he found it to be a very pleasant town to come, and obviously we had relatively good weather, and the town certainly got itself in order. It took a lot of work to arrange for this, but I think that we showed that Princeton was the kind of town that can handle the president anytime he or she wants to come to this place.
Absolutely.
That's good news. Can you tell us something about the logistics involved in getting ready? I understand an enormous number of preparations were made, and it's always a job to move the president around. What sort of things did the township do in the borough?
Well, the township had to grant an emergency helicopter permit. We got a call late Tuesday night saying the president's likely to land in Princeton Township, so we had to poll each of our members early on Wednesday morning just to get that cleared away. Lots of little details. Most of them were handled through the university. Just trying to meet the president was quite a long procedure, too. So there's a lot of work. Most of it was done by other parties, thank goodness.
It was the only way I could stop the construction on the downtown streets, but at least for one day, we got all the utility companies out and the road crews stayed home, and we had to close the streets down for a while, but now they'll open up and people will be back and enjoy the rest of the day.
So the roads are open as we speak, or in about an hour?
No, they should have started opening as soon as the president started speaking, because he went to Nassau Hall to receive his honorary degree, and we had Nassau Street closed while he was coming from Nassau Hall over here to the Woodrow Wilson School. And then that gave people a chance to line the street and see him, and I think a lot of people got a chance to do that today.
Unfortunately, we were all in here, and we don't know if anybody lined the street or not.
Well, this is a day when you go where you're supposed to be.
Absolutely.
And if they, obviously, an event like this has a lot of security to check, and I think that it was handled extremely well, and I didn't see any incidents at all. That we had a lot of people, and I don't think there were any people disappointed, and that it worked out.
I think the whole thing worked out well. I thought the speech went especially well, and as Marv and I were talking, I think there is a sense that, in fact, it might be considered a major speech sometime in the future when people look back on what are the powers of the presidency, what is important, and setting the tone, for example. I thought those messages were the sort of things that may become a historical event.
Yeah, he didn't just come to Princeton today. He came and he obviously had in mind that he wanted to make this statement about his view of the presidency, and he used this occasion in order to make that major statement. So I assume that one of these days there'll be pamphlets around the White House which will be called the Princeton speech, that Bush's views on the American presidency.
And meanwhile,
will that be the Princeton Borough or the Princeton Township speech?
It'll be the Princeton speech.
It'll be the Princeton
by
speech.
that time, they may be one and the same, right?
Perhaps,
Yes. Well, thank you both very much.
Thank
for
you very
chatting with
much,
us
and
today.
glad that C-TEC was able to give live coverage so that everybody in town, whether they could get into the plaza here or not, had a chance to see the event and all be participating.
Well, thank you. Thanks again.
Good to see you.
We have just heard from both of the mayors, the mayor of the township and the mayor of the borough here at Princeton, and everybody seems to be thrilled with the way that this worked out today, Nick. One more final thing about something that President Bush will be taking home with him from Princeton. He was presented with a few gifts right after his honorary degree ceremony, a black and orange striped Princeton tie,
Something like the one I may be wearing now.
We don't know if it has tiger heads on it or not.
Let's hope it does.
And for Mrs. Bush, an orange and black silk scarf was given, and the most important item for the two first dogs. We have tiger dog collars, Princeton tiger dog collars for Millie and Ranger. There was also a crystal baccarat tiger, which was presented to Mrs. Bush, and we hope that all of these mementos will remind them of their time here in Princeton, and we certainly have all enjoyed it very much.
That about wraps it up here today. Thanks for joining us, and it was indeed an historic occasion.
My name is Mark Haverkate. I'm the Vice President of C-TEC Cable. I'd like to thank all of you for watching our coverage of President Bush's visit to Princeton University. I'd like to thank the people at Princeton that helped us out on this production, the fine job that Nick and Adrian did explaining what was happening. I'd like to thank also the technicians that made this production possible, especially Darryl Miller and Jim Wittersheen, and I'd like to thank Kaz Beelan in our truck for his fine job in directing and producing this event. And we hope to bring many more of these live special events to you in the future. And thanks especially for being our customer and for keeping us in business.
You've been watching live coverage of President George Bush at Princeton University on C-TEC Cable Systems in Princeton, New Jersey.